Welcome back to Humanizing AI. Today, we are talking about what AI is actually doing to our jobs. And
Mm.
it's not what most people expected, right? Instead of just replacing routine manual jobs, AI is flipping the script by rapidly taking on high level creative and analytical tasks. We are exploring how companies can navigate this massive shift safely without losing the human experience and institutional knowledge that keeps a business alive. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. And to lead us there in this discussion, we have Alexis Fink. Dr. Fink is a technology executive with 20 years of leadership at Microsoft, Intel, and Meta. Most recently, a VP of People Analytics and Workforce Strategy at Meta, where Alexis and I met. In her post-corporate season, she is advising startups, speaking and writing, as well as helping organizations directly as they wrestle with organizational transformation, AI strategy and implementation, and organization effectiveness and organization design. So she's all thing that your organization needs right now. She's an innovator who drives results at the intersection of technology, data, and talent, and is known for her strategic vision, inclusive leadership, and ability to translate technical challenges into actionable solutions that drive businesses' value. You can read about Alexis. She's also author of two highly regarded books, Investing in People and Employee Sensing and Surveys. So I'll pause here and let Alexis introduce herself a little bit, and then we can go into the discussion today.
Thank you so much. That was very kind. I think you covered most of the big stuff. Maybe the only other thing to add is this sort of intersection of people and technology operating at very high levels has been a consistent theme for me literally since the 90s. My dissertation research was how do we keep fighter pilots alive, which is all about the intersection of people and technology in high stakes situations that are rapidly moving, which seems shockingly applicable to the world that we're in now, recording this in 2026.
That's awesome. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah,
So you learn every day you learn a new thing about you.
every
That's
day.
awesome. So yeah, so let's get into this discussion, right? So we are discussing workforce. You're an expert in workforce, and as all of us read, Andrej Karpathy just released his AI job exposure map, showing a
Mhm.
radical inversion, right? So I did similar kind of research at NYU a couple of years ago, where I naively said that software engineers are not at risk. But then LLMs came and everything just shifted, right? So I just, as a scientist of human systems, does this exposure score that Andre is talking about and others are talking about, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I just really wanted to understand your thoughts on these recent shifts that we're seeing right now.
That is a gigantic question, and it's one of my favorite ones. Part of what's exciting about this moment is the opportunity to fundamentally rethink work and our ability to do things that were never possible before. Even where we have highly creative work, work that we have to synthesize, that kind of work has traditionally been gated and really held back, right? The capacity to do it was limited by the scarce resources to execute it, the time it took to do that work, et cetera. And while it seems superficially to be a significant threat to the status and everything else that the people in those jobs have held, and it's true that there may be some repricing, we've known now for, frankly, a couple of centuries that increased availability actually increases demand for something rather than decreasing it. Jevons paradox goes back to, I think, 1865 and the sort of coal industry, where all of a sudden there was more of something that was previously scarce. And that, by reducing that friction, makes this thing that was previously challenging to get your hands on much, much more widely distributed. One of the easiest places to see that is in coaching. Executive coaching was scarce, it was expensive, it was hard to get your hands on this. And the advent of some of these tools has meant that every frontline supervisor can have a really competent coach and advisor sitting right inside their mobile device. And I expect that to be true of other kinds of creative work. I know that I'm a catastrophe at art. My childhood art teacher actually fired me and told my parents to quit wasting their money. So
Oh,
bad. And AI has been amazing at that for me. And that didn't take away a job from an artist. I would not have paid a commercial artist to build diagrams for me. I just would have done a crap job of it in PowerPoint. And now with Notebook LM or Canva or something else, I can build something that's beautiful, is higher quality for me, is available now to audiences that would not have had access to it in the past, and does not necessarily destroy the market for the elite people who are delivering it. There still tends to persist a market for that highly elevated capability. And we're also seeing where these technologies to do legal review or build software, et cetera, they're really great at taking someone from zero to average. I just read a thing actually this morning about how it was sort of taking down. We've seen this now for almost a year, but I saw another one this morning, that it's actually bringing down the ceiling, where it's dampening some of the creativity that we had seen previously. And so one of the hypotheses coming out of this is that you will then see like a return to expertise for really getting kind of the elite performance. And because there's broader demand, you'll actually see more people looking for some of that elite performance as they start to see the differentiation between something high quality but average and something
Mm.
extraordinary that may deliver competitive advantage to your company. Like, it's really going to be interesting to watch. I don't think all computer scientists will suddenly be out of work. They may be working in different
Yeah.
contexts. Pricing may come down, but I think that in many of these spaces, we're going to continue to see demand for these jobs.
That's an interesting take, and I know this is more about workforce and jobs, and but what you mentioned earlier, I've noticed that too, where as I've been using LLMs for my tasks like coding or in PowerPoints
Yeah.
and software writing, what I've realized is the creativity part of that is being lost, and some now
Right.
I'm deliberately not using it sometimes, right?
That's right.
Because I feel like it's bringing, like you said, the ceiling is being brought down, and I go to presentations and pitch competitions, and I see everybody's deck is exactly the same. I
They're
can
all
say,
just
"Oh
Claude. They're not even changing the
yeah,
fonts, right?
like it looks the same. What is happening here?" Right? So hopefully, we get over that bump and everybody finds their own space on using these tools. But that's a fascinating thing you brought up there.
Well, one
But
of the
let's
other things that
yeah.
I've found, which people in like liberal arts will tell you this, I have always, for 20 years since graduate school, I've always written as a way to refine my own thinking. Right. And so if you just take something that an LLM generates for you, you're not invested in it. We know from research people are quicker to disregard it. They're less committed to it. And also it's not making their own thinking more sophisticated. And I am invested in the quality of my own thinking. And so I absolutely use these tools as a research assistant. I was using EBSCO Host for decades to do my searching. My searching is better now. But it doesn't mean that I'm letting it write my outlines. I'm not letting it write text. I'm not letting it rob me of the opportunity to improve and challenge my own thinking. And so I think that
That's a
that's one of the places that we're seeing a difference in the way in which you might use something. Now, do I
I
let it
agree.
write SOWs for me? Yeah, because that's not a creative part of my process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do use it as thinking partner a lot as well. That helps me. But then, yeah, the last piece of it has to be mine. Otherwise, it's just you're just not there, regardless of what you're building. Like it's an app or your
Yeah.
website. I mean, anything can use it, but it's just not you. If that last piece is not you, right?
Just
Uh,
last week, I used it for a piece of writing and said, "Hey, would you look at this before I push it out?" And they said, "This one sentence, it's a little flippant. You shouldn't say that. And oh, you should reverse
yeah,
these. Like, you should reverse how this goes because the flow would be a little better." I'm totally happy to do that kind of thing. It was still my
yeah,
original
yeah.
thinking and still my original voice.
Agreed, agreed. So, I mean, that actually connects the thread here, right? The nature of job is changing, right? I mean, and the way we used to think about automation is, so if you think about work as a bundle of tasks, then automation basically means which task can you automate, and based on that, some people are at more risk versus other people, right? Um, but with LLM, it seems like almost everything can be automated to an extent, and that's why people are kind of justifying the layoffs, and so let's get there, right? So how does workforce strategy change when you know the task can be easily automated, people are replaceable by AI, how are you, I mean, as a workforce strategy expert, right? So yes, there's good things about LLM that we can use, but for a workplace, what does that mean for employees? How should they think about this?
So there are two things I want to talk about there. The first is I want to push back on the idea that everything can be automated by an LLM. That's true for you and me who do office jobs, right? Almost everything we do is on a
Mhm.
computer. Most things you do on a computer, an LLM can at least take a passable stab at. Fine. The reality is an enormous number of people don't operate in jobs like ours. We know that an LLM can do a decent job on, diagnosis or reading, not an LLM, but an AI tool reading an X-ray. It can't start an IV. It can't do a dressing change, can't crack an egg. There are enormous number of jobs and tasks that an LLM can't do, and frankly, robotics can't do either. So let's be a little clear about what it can replace. If we limit ourselves to those kind of office professional class jobs, office comma or professional class jobs where these new technologies can do a lot of the replacing, the answer is still the same for how we think about workforce strategy, which is figure out where your company's going to be in 5 to 10 years, ideally. You don't want to 12 months. It's not a workforce strategy. It's just a staffing plan. 5 to 10 years, where it's going to be. What are the skills and tasks that are going to be required? What are the ways you can get those skills and tasks done? What is your internal talent supply going to look like? And where do you supplement that with external talent supply, either contractor, vendor, et cetera, or through hiring? So you basically look into the future. And my favorite version of this is one where you borrow from strategy and you do scenario planning. And you say, in scenario A, you'll need this. And here's where we can get it. And it'll be this much internal. That means we have to do this much external. I'd really rather be bringing the external in earlier and growing them for these financial reasons. It needs to be in this location, these customers. And you'll run that for this version of the future and that version of the future and that version of the future. You basically play science fiction games with yourself and figure out what are the versions of the future that I'm worried about. And then I like to think about what are the versions of the future that have the most risk if I'm wrong, and make sure that I'm building myself so that the likelihood of being wrong is low. There's an old story about there's a succession planning story about GE building 4 CEOs in their succession planning, just sort of a distinct case in workforce planning. And only one of them got the job. And people looked at them and said, wow, it was so wasteful to put all that time and effort and money into building all of these sort of excess CEO candidates. And the reality is all 3 of the excess ended up in CEO jobs. And so what happened is that GE got the very best one. They got to grow
Um,
for possibilities for their future. They weren't completely sure what profile they were going to need when they got there. So they built not 4 copies of the same, turns out they were all guys, not 4 copies of the same guy, but 4 different versions of the future that they might need. And they had the exact one by investing and making sure that they had covered those possibilities. And so you can take the same kind of thinking towards workforce strategy. And I'm seeing actually right now, as AI is disrupting work, I won't name them because it's not appropriate, but one very large knowledge selling company is investing in an hourglass shape. So they have a lot of entry level people that are having their capability elevated by the use of technology, and they don't have very many in the middle. And a peer firm is choosing a diamond shape where they have very little at the bottom and a lot in the middle, who are having the work formerly done by those entry level people done by technology. So completely different philosophies of where work is valuable, where I want to spend my money, where I want to absorb risk. And thinking through those kinds of org designs helps you today. It also helps you think about the pipeline you'll need for tomorrow. I worry a lot about those in the hourglass shape. What's going to happen when they need new leaders 10 years from now? Will they have folks who
mm,
feel their business in their bones, and can drive that business forward? It's an interesting
that's a
set of
great
problems.
point. Yeah, yeah. So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is the principles of workforce strategy, the way we think about this, don't need to change. We just need to adapt a little bit, probably because this is rapid, more rapid than previous
Yeah.
times when disruptions have happened. Um, my worry a little bit there is, like you said, right? So there are certain jobs which are more automatable now by LLMs, and
Yes.
that's a fact, right? And I think that's where I'm trying to probe a little bit into is, at the organization's level, what can we do to help these people?
Okay.
Um, and then at a personal level, how should they be thinking about this? Like, how should they be aware of the situation?
So the title of the podcast is Humanizing AI. So let's talk about that for a minute. A lot of
Yeah.
workforce strategy, when you talk about it, you're talking about those longer horizons. There's another angle to workforce strategy, which is talking about today. What is the work I need done by FTEs? What is the work I need done by sort of almost like an internal gig worker, folks who are inside but can kind of swarm around a problem? And what is the work I might be accessing externally through contractors, vendors, et cetera? What is the work an LLM might do for me? And what is the work that robotics or physical AI might do for me? So you need to think about all of those possibilities. And then you do need to think about the folks whose work was previously quite routine, for example, or frankly,
Hmm.
those very creative folks that the new demand hasn't emerged around. We know from the recent Stanford Digital Economy Lab study, came out maybe 6 weeks before we recorded this. It's a great study. It's 116 pages, but it's reasonably easy to get through 160 pages, and your local neighborhood LLM will probably do a decent job summarizing it down to a page if you need it to. Um, I have a summary on my LinkedIn page if you just want to borrow that. But one of the key findings was that fewer than half of AI implementation projects resulted in actual displacement, resulted in headcount loss. So where you're actually doing a successful deployment, it is not necessarily resulting in headcount loss. And you'll remember when we were together at Meta, we always had 3 times the requests that we could actually staff. And so part of what will happen is now we can actually staff the stuff, the requests that were coming in,
Mm.
all of which is valuable, but it just never quite came across the line. That kind of stuff is possible to do now. There's another scenario, a story that I heard recently about IKEA that automated an awful lot of its customer service. And there were a whole bunch of now people at loose ends. And so they built I think it was an interior design service that then generated enormous amounts of entirely new revenue
Mm.
because they were able to take folks and deploy them in a completely new way. They were able to do something that was never possible in that organization before. Because one of the dirty secrets, when I was early in my career, I always thought if I could prove ROI, I should be able to get things funded, right? If this work can pay for itself, why won't finance approve adding this headcount or buying this piece of technology? The ROI is there, right? What I didn't realize until I got quite a bit further along in my career is, yeah, the ROI might be there, but there are also principles adopted by organizations about what's the maximum amount of headcount HR is allowed to have. I don't care if their investment will pay for itself. This company has said it's only allowed to be 5% of our heads or 5% of our budget or whatever that particular rule is. And so if you're facing a situation where your ability to deliver value was capped by your ability to have people to do work, then freeing those people up can legitimately deliver more value back into that organization and not low value. Like you and I remember some of the stuff we were doing had 10, 20x returns based on doing that piece of work. Well, if I can do all the 20x stuff and all the 10x stuff that dropped off the list before, that's still really valuable back to the organization.
That's a great point, and I love the way you're looking at it positively, right? Because what you're saying is, yes, some of the tasks will be automated, but that means we'll have workforce to focus on other things. And if we can
Yep.
create those other things, which will eventually happen. I mean, that's what we have
Yeah.
seen historically, right? I mean, if automation comes in, then people focus on certain things that cannot be automated.
Yep.
And so I think I love how you're talking about IKEA and what they
Mhm.
did. And I hope more organizations take that path rather than
Yeah.
we don't need you now. And you can be let go right now.
If you look at the history of layoffs, go back to like the 70s and 80s when there was an awful lot of layoff according to some new technology that was coming in and robotics, et cetera. One of my friends and co-authors, actually, Wayne Cassio, has been studying downsizings, which is another word for layoffs, for
Yeah.
decades now. And in my own career, as well as Wayne's research that goes over decades, you show that it's usually a short-term experience. Like you will exit a whole bunch of people and then you'll you'll, spin right back up. And so I have my quibbles with the way organizations handle this. I
Yeah.
have built systems in the past that then built kind of flexibility into using contingent or external forms of labor market where they have a third party that's actually handling their benefits and their paycheck and whatnot and can deploy them against different contracts as opposed to ramp up and then exit folks, which tends to be both expensive and traumatic for the folks who are leaving and for the folks who get left behind. Plus traumatic to your brand as an organization if you're doing it repeatedly or dramatically. So there are other ways we can be handling some of those boom and bust kinds of cycles rather than doing it exclusively through the blunt instrument of a layoff.
Yeah. I hope more leaders listen to what you're saying right now, because that's the research work. We know about this, and
Yeah.
I hope more people are cognizant about this and read the history of what happened and what can happen, right?
Yep.
But I think just following one thread there, which I was trying to get into earlier, but it
Oh,
got
yes.
duplicated in another question, is so this is for organization, right? So there's a
Right.
strategy. To summarize what we have discussed so far, there is a worker strategy that can still work. We might need to think about AI slightly differently because the rapid changes that are happening. But like IKEA is doing, we can think about freeing people from one category of jobs and put them in other category of jobs. Um, but if, as an individual, though, right? And I think you talk about this. You've written about AI exposing the BS economy,
Yes.
task
Yep.
that perhaps never needed to exist, right? So as AI takes over this, in your word, I think silicon tasks, summarizing, coding, analyzing,
Yeah.
what are the carbon skills that become the new premium? Like, what advice would you give to folks listening to
Yeah.
this? What should they focus on?
So most of the sort of high quality advice that we see in this area, which comports with my experience, is there are lots of things that machines don't replicate well. The sense of care, whether that's care work for children and healthcare and elder care, but also care work in delivering a job offer, care work in any kind of organizational setting that still exists. We've seen lots of parts of recruiting get automated, but particularly if you are mid-career or above, that's going to be a dialogue. It's not just going to be roboticized. Here's your offer. Check yes or no, right? Um, there's also a great deal of sort of sophisticated judgment and dealing with things that have never happened before. So, synthesized futures. And because LLMs or other technologies can't be held accountable, there are certain decisions that we won't let them make. Someone has to own that decision. And suddenly, when I own that decision, my attention to it is much deeper. And so it can be a thought partner, as we sort of discussed earlier, but it should not be a decision maker. It can execute tasks where those are done and even pricing decisions perhaps, but not organization strategy decisions. I think a lot of sales roles, particularly external, outside sales as opposed to inside sales, make a lot of sense. It'll be interesting to see what happens to the role of managers. I've seen people say they will expand dramatically. I've seen people say it'll collapse entirely. It'll be interesting to see. I suspect both of those things will be true in different places. And then some of the other things that are difficult to replace are, of course, the physical tasks that we mentioned earlier, changing a bandage, et cetera. Um, and I, uh, I think there is an awful lot of space that we are not paying attention to that is about broadly governance and meaning making. The intersection of cultural knowledge and specific cultural knowledge and what something means and why something matters and how something is applied, that's often very poorly documented, particularly when you start to get into an organization. And so, at least for some period of time, you almost need like a docent kind of a role, helping those context layers, which are so important, helping them be well constructed. If you're just looking straight at a database, you don't necessarily know what it's in there and why it matters. And the exact same fact can have dramatically different meaning if you bring one frame to it versus the other. And so that meaning layer, I think, at least for the foreseeable future, and maybe right now the foreseeable future is a month. I think it'll be longer than that. But those context and meaning layers still have a human role, at least as an auditor.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And yes, I think I 100% agree. Like focusing on skills that are less automatable,
Yeah.
the humane skills, as you're saying, this the carbon skills, as you're saying,
Yeah.
makes sense to me. Um, I think the challenge there a little bit at individual level would be just figuring this out, right? So what are
Yeah.
those skills? Like and I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and people are really worried about their jobs right now, and they're really worried about what should I be doing now, right? I mean, should I be learning? Should I be getting into AI? Everybody's talking about AI. Maybe I should just become an AI engineer now, jump on that bandwagon. And for me, I think that's a bad move because, that's still coding, and, coding is something that's more accessible because of LLMs right now. So what you say makes more sense to me, and focusing on those things that are around it, that has more human values to it, right? Um, were you going to add something? Sorry, did I cut
I
you
was
off?
just going to sort of
Yeah.
add, if we
Yeah.
think about what should people do, it's a little bit like teenage sex. Everybody thinks everybody else is doing it, and nobody's doing that good of a job, right? So there are lots and lots of companies that are playing. Often the pilots are small and narrow. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of what LLMs can do now are not in principle that different from what robotic process automation could do 15 years ago. And the challenges with that in terms of having like clear guidance about what's reasonable, those problems still exist. And so one of the reasons that we're seeing the potential and what happened in a pilot not play out in a full implementation is because that data layer is not always great. And the second is because it's difficult to aggregate up to a real business impact from individual level efficiency. And people think that that will be linear, and it's not. If I'm more efficient at my job, it doesn't make the company more effective at what it's trying to do. And so I
Mm.
think there is a real human skill still, and this should be augmented by technology, but not exclusively. I think there's a real human skill in redesigning work and rethinking what work can be. And so if people were asking what to do, yes, of course, you should always know how to use tools. But as you know, like you just get into a real flooded field, and people with CS degrees are probably going to be better than you are as a person who's, just figured out how to use Lovable. Um, but someone who really understands work, someone who really understands how business process works, someone who's smart at some of the things about design thinking and really reimagining how something could function, someone who's smart about the principles of lean from 20 years ago in terms of efficiency and reliability and how do you put this together, someone who's effective at change management and really thinking about how do you put something in place such that it can actually be done. Those kinds of capabilities are still quite human and really helpful at actually harvesting the value that AI can bring forward. And it's one of the places we're seeing organizations really stumble is they're not taking those steps and they're kind of assuming that
Yeah.
the individual efficacy will roll up and they're being disappointed.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree there. In last few minutes, I really want to focus on. I mean, podcast is mainly about AI governance. We think
Yes.
about issues around AI risk and how to mitigate those, how to handle those. I see workforce strategy as a part of AI governance now, or at least related in many senses. Um, but one thing because I have you here, I would want to take your get your ideas on how AI is being used right now in HR tools, right? So I mean, we've always done that, right? We've always
Mhm.
done that. It's not like it's new. I remember I was hired at Liberty Mutual Insurance as a director of data science to ensure that we are getting enough signals from resume because I understood
Yeah.
NLP, right? So it's like people have been doing this for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
It's not new, but I think it's just the risks of LLMs are new, right? So and now people are, I think most folks I've been talking to are worried about how are we using the generative AI, newer forms of AI in HR tools, whether it's in
Yes.
hiring or career mapping or you name it, right? So, how are they being used right now, and are we being careful about it? Because with the recent DOJ settlement around AI in hiring,
Yeah.
and the defense with Eightfold, I think, right? And the defense that we didn't know the algorithm was biased is not going to work. So
That's
how
not
should
okay. Yeah.
so how should we think about um, the use of AI in HR tools? How
Yeah.
should we be careful about it? Any thoughts there on what you're seeing right now?
So many thoughts. So let's
Okay,
stick with the recruiting case to start with. You're right. We've been using
yeah,
technology in recruiting since, I don't know, the 70s. And one of the things that's
exactly.
different now is LLMs are capable of being unsupervised, as so is like other technologies, but they're capable of being unsupervised, and it's easy. And it gives you an answer that feels right. And so I get really anxious. In fact, I've turned down advisory opportunities with a variety of startups because I'm really uncomfortable with the unsupervised way in which they are allowing these tools to make decisions. There are federal laws, uniform guidelines. SIOP, the Society for Registered Organization Psychology, put out a white paper a couple of years ago, like 18 months ago maybe, about the use of AI in selection procedures and how to think about validation and proving a lack of bias, which isn't just about being like socially responsible. It's also about being business responsible, because what bias really does is make you choose someone who's less qualified than someone you might otherwise have chosen. It's actually a genuine business problem. So it's helping you not make bad choices, and making sure that we're using validated supervised tools there is really important. And I'm distressed by the amount of sloppy stuff that's being covered by a trade secret, and is not moving forward. If we move out of recruiting as a judgment space, there's an awful lot of recruiting that is a process space. So how do you schedule interviews? How do you match, an interviewer to a person, to a time, to a room, right? That is just an optimization problem. Great. Use technology for that. That's so lovely. But also there are people who that used to be their job. And those people now need to do things or have the opportunity to do different things. That different thing can be candidate prep, for example, which can be really, really valuable in helping the organizations genuinely get the very best talent, not just the person who could afford to pay an external coach, right? So there are ways that you can rebuild that. If you think about the rest of HR, there's been technology in payroll for decades. There's been technology in pay equity for a very long time. Those are all good places to be using technology. Again, please don't do it unsupervised. Don't be just like throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping payroll is right. That can't happen. Um, where there is not a high stakes decision, where there's not a hiring decision or a promotion decision or performance review decision, I'm much more comfortable with the use of technology in a generative way. And the generative technology is almost always by definition probabilistic, which means I have less control over the outcome, which means it could do something that kind of goes off the ranch. However, if it's helping me spitball about what my career options would be, or helping me figure out how to have a good conversation with my mentor, or helping me prepare for a really hard conversation with a colleague, I'm much more comfortable with a generative possibility. And that opens up opportunities for people to be prepared and to develop in ways that wouldn't be available before. My HR business partner can't help me rehearse a difficult conversation 30 times until I'm comfortable having it, because I'm a person with social anxiety and I feel sick to my stomach at the idea of this conversation, right? But an LLM doesn't care. It's going to let you do this and do this and do this until you could do it half asleep, and you can get over that fear and really be successful in that challenging conversation. So I'm really comfortable for a lot of the HR use cases that are developmental in nature,
Yeah,
they're exploratory in
yeah.
nature, and that fill a gap that would otherwise have been unfilled. Like that is a beautiful and powerful opportunity.
Agreed, agreed, and thank you for that like holistic, HR landscape and how you can use it and where you should be using it and where you shouldn't be using it.
Yeah.
How are you seeing these systems being governed, right? So who makes the decision? Like you brought up accountability earlier, right? So who, like, I mean, is there a process as you're talking to people, talking to this organization on, how a tool gets selected, how they're evaluated for exact risks that we talked about right now, right? Because at United Health, where I was working, we had a whole AI governance team,
Mhm.
and including, like, even the HR tools and everything had to go through our process to ensure that the product was accurate, bias free, compliant, all of those things, right? So
Mhm.
are you seeing more and more organizations doing that right now, or is it more on, after the regulators come knocking on the door and like, oh, I should have done it, but I didn't. Like, what are you seeing? What is the trend right now, if I may
Yeah.
ask?
I am definitely seeing a lot more governance teams than I did, say, even 2 years ago, right? What's unclear is the extent to which those governance teams have much in the way of teeth. Are
Mm,
they decision makers or are they advisors? Do they
mm,
have processes to catch everything that's flowing through, or only the things where the people know that it's a possibility and have the integrity to say, "Hey, please look at my stuff," right? One time, this goes back quite a long time, the only way I actually finally got my arms around this problem was by working with purchasing. And here were all of the vendors that if anything came up, they had to stop. They couldn't accept an SOW. They had to route it to me, right? So, and then we'd have to get all kinds of master agreements around the security and physical security and data processes and everything else. But we literally had to like prevent checks from going out before we could wrangle the problem because so much slips underneath. And even when you have an organization that has fantastic governance about, oh, you need this kind of security and you can't access these kinds of tools, and they have those rules, it doesn't mean that their underlying data are built that way. You're hearing all of these horror stories about, somebody puts this new tool in and it turns out the underlying data didn't have the right security and they like delete stuff that they shouldn't, or they access row level sensitive data that they should never see because maybe their access controls was a layer above and this new tool goes directly to the database. Really scary. And you don't think about that unless you're sort of a data engineering or data architecture person. And the biggest risk that we keep seeing coming up in surveys is people don't like the guardrails. And it's hard to be mad at somebody who's scrappy and wants to get stuff done. But those scrappy people who want to get stuff done copy and paste stuff into their own, private LLM account, which not only defeats the purpose of the great governance, it also exposes like confidential information if they don't have the settings right and it's being uploaded into training sets. Like there's so many problems with it, and we know that it's rampant. So I think about it in a couple of ways. I'm seeing more trends towards it. I hope to see more people locking down the ability to export so that you can't, so that, it'll feel draconian and people will complain, but that you can't open up a different LLM or email it to yourself and put it on your private machine or whatever else, that we can actually plug some of those holes. But if you're not in a large organization with a sophisticated IT department, a lot of those hard governance procedures and rules aren't in place yet. And so it's a real leaky system right now.
agreed, 100% agreed. And like you said, it also depends on where the governance team sits and
Yes.
what kind of power they have within the organization. I've seen um, all sides of the coins where policy came directly from the board and CEO, and now everybody is listening to it. Everybody goes through that process, especially in healthcare. I've seen that. But then I've
Yes.
also seen where people are just saying, "Oh yeah, there's a committee. Apparently, a committee exists if we need help." Right? So that's
Right.
more advice. Right? So
Yeah.
it's a wild wild west in some senses, but my worry is, especially in HR, my worry is that that has real impact on people, right? I mean, if we
Yeah.
don't have govern these hiring tools and other tools properly, and if they are biased, we're harming people and organizations. If you're in a lawsuit, if you're in a class action lawsuit, it was just not about one tool; it was about your company now, right?
Well,
So
and you
hopefully,
think about data privacy, particularly if you do business in Europe, those fines are per incident, like individual person
yeah,
incident.
yeah,
Those are company ending fines.
yeah, they are,
So this is not a trivial risk.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people are not. They're not as attentive, and they don't want to be like the fun police. Um, but,
Yes.
but man, this stuff matters.
I know this was a digression. So just to bring everything back again to the main topic of the discussion, right? I mean, we started having a conversation on how AI has like flipped the script on who's more expendable now in some senses, right? What can be
Mhm.
automated now? And as a result, what we are seeing is, hey, let's go with headcount reduction. We don't need these people. So to end this conversation again, I know you have talked about this earlier in other ways as well, but you know, um, can you help people understand what happens to the long-term health of the company that chooses headcount reduction strategy versus other strategies we have talked about earlier? Like what, like from research and from history,
Yeah.
what could happen to this organization? It might not
Well,
happen, but what is the working theory here?
if you look at the sort of research and history in this field, and I will confess it's been some time since I looked at it, so I don't have the precise numbers top of mind. But
Yeah.
there tends to be a pretty predictable pattern where the stock market is like, "Oh, good for you! You've reduced costs. That's terrific," and so they get a bump up in valuation, et cetera. And over the long term, they tend to underperform uh, compared to if you do all the good economics of a peer group, et cetera. And so you get this sort of short term good for you and this longer term degradation. And so I would really hope that organizations can be a little bit more mindful as they plan what their talent needs are. I keep hearing this forecast that half of people within a year's time will be in some kind of more flexible working arrangement, which means that there will be more supply. We'll have to figure out
Hmm.
some things about how does health insurance work in the US where we have this wonky health universe, and how do we make sure that there is enough predictability of income for people to do things like qualify for mortgages, and there are an awful lot of pieces of our social and economic infrastructure that are tied to the idea of a air quotes permanent job uh,
Right.
that we have to collectively come to some solutions about. But it will be really interesting to see what organizations do and what solutions they come up with to take advantage of these new opportunities and get
Right.
out of this cycle of overhire cut, overhire cut, overhire cut.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that. There's so much I could talk about. I could talk about like, education funnel now. What should that look like? There's so much we could
Yeah.
talk about, but I know the time is limited. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast, sharing your knowledge with the audience. This was really needed conversation for my audience as well, where we mainly focus on AI governance and risks, but this is a risk. This is a risk right now. And I really wanted your perspective on that. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was lovely to see you and talk to you again.
Thank you, Alexis.